I felt his eyes on me before I saw him. That peculiar sensation of being watched, studied, dissected by a gaze that held something darker than brotherly concern. When I finally turned from where I stood at our kitchen window, washing the breakfast dishes on that humid August morning in 1967, Marcus was there in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, intense, calculating, almost hungry. At 15, I was still naive enough to think that uncomfortable feeling in my stomach was just my imagination. After all, this was Marcus, my protective older brother, who had always been the golden child of our family, the responsible one who helped Daddy at his auto repair shop and made Mama proud with his good grades and polite manners. Everyone in our small town of Oakwood, Georgia, knew Marcus Newman as the kind of young man any parent would be proud to call their son. But something had changed in those summer weeks of 1967, something I couldn't quite name, but felt deep in my bones every time he looked at me. The way his eyes would linger too long when I walked past. The way he'd find excuses to be in the same room. The way his voice had taken on a different tone when he spoke to me, softer, more intimate, as if we shared secrets we'd never shared. Leah? He said that morning, his voice cutting through the humid air, thick with the scent of Mama's biscuits and Daddy's strong coffee. We need to talk. My hands stilled on the dish I was scrubbing. Something in his tone made my heartbeat quicken, though I couldn't have said why. About what Marcus... About changes. About how things are going to be different now that you're growing up. The way he said those last two words made my skin crawl. I set down the dish and turned to face him, fully studying his face for some clue about what he meant. Marcus had always been handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way that made the church ladies fuss over him and the town girls giggle when he walked by. But now, looking at him in the morning light filtering through our kitchen curtains, I saw something else lurking behind those familiar brown eyes. I don't understand what you mean. You will? He said, stepping closer. Soon enough, little sister, you'll understand exactly what I mean. Hello, my dears. My name is Leah Newman, though most folks around here call me Miss Leah or Grandma Lily, now that I've reached the ripe old age of 72. What I just shared with you happened 57 years ago, but I remember it as clearly as if it were yesterday. That moment in our kitchen was the beginning of the darkest chapter of my life, a chapter I've kept locked away in my heart for decades. Today, I'm finally ready to tell you the whole truth about what happened between my brother and me during those terrible months in 1967 and 1968. It's a story about how someone you trust most can become your greatest tormentor, about how even in the darkest moments there can be unexpected angels, and about how sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply refusing to stay silent. This isn't an easy story to tell, and I imagine it won't be easy for you to hear. But it's a story that needs telling because somewhere out there, someone might be living through their own version of what I endured. And if my words can give even one person the courage to speak up, to fight back, to refuse to accept that violence and abuse are just the way things are, then every difficult moment of sharing this will have been worth it. To understand how completely my world shattered, you first need to understand what that world looked like before Marcus showed his true face. Oakwood, Georgia in 1967 was a town where time moved slowly and everybody knew everybody else's business going back 3 generations. We had one main street with Clancy's General Store, Murphy's Diner, the First Baptist Church, and Daddy's auto repair shop squeezed between the post office and Mrs. Henderson's beauty parlor. It was the kind of place where screen doors stayed unlocked, where children rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and where Sunday dinner at Grandma Connie's was as regular as sunrise. The Vietnam War raged on television screens, and the civil rights movement was reshaping the South. But in Oakwood, those big world events felt distant, like storms happening in someone else's sky. Our family fit perfectly into this small town picture. Daddy John Newman was a man's man who could fix any engine and whose handshake was better than any contract. His hands were always stained with grease, but his heart was as clean as fresh snow. Mama Mary Newman taught third grade at Oakwood Elementary and was known throughout the county for her patience with difficult children and her pound cake at church socials. And then there was Marcus, 6 years my senior, and seemingly perfect in every way that mattered in 1967 Georgia. He'd been captain of his high school football team, graduated as valedictorian, and had turned down a scholarship to the University of Georgia to stay home and help Daddy with the business. At 21, he was engaged to Rose Patterson, the prettiest girl in 3 counties, and everyone expected them to have the wedding of the decade come spring. I was the baby of the family, the surprise child who came along when Mama thought her childbearing days were behind her. 15 years old, in the summer of 1967, I was a dreamer who loved to read Nancy Drew mysteries and imagined myself becoming a teacher like Mama, or maybe even a writer who would travel to exotic places and have grand adventures. For the first 15 years of my life, I felt completely safe in the cocoon of our family's love. Marcus had been my protector, my guide, my hero. When bullies at school called me Four Eyes because of my thick glasses, Marcus would appear and send them scurrying. When I struggled with algebra, Marcus would sit with me at the kitchen table for hours, patiently explaining equations until they made sense. When I had nightmares, I could slip into his room and he'd let me sleep on the floor beside his bed until morning. That's why what began happening that summer was so devastating. The person I trusted most in the world, the person I looked up to and depended on for protection, was slowly revealing himself to be someone else entirely. Looking back now with decades of perspective, I can see that Marcus's transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, insidious like poison seeping slowly through clean water. It started with small things that I dismissed or rationalized away. The hugs that lasted too long. The way he'd find excuses to touch my shoulder, my arm, my hair. The comments about how I was developing and becoming a young lady that felt different from the way other adults talked about my growing up. The new rules that seemed to appear from nowhere. Leah can't go to the movies with her friends anymore, he announced at dinner one evening in late August. A 15-year-old girl has no business being out after dark without family supervision. Mama looked surprised. We'd been having this same argument for months about my curfew, and she'd finally agreed I was old enough for occasional evening outings with my girlfriends. Now, Marcus, she said gently, we've already discussed this. Leah's a responsible girl, and she'll be with the Morrison girls. They're good Christian children. Times are changing. Mama. Marcus replied, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he'd started using more frequently. There are dangers out there you don't understand. Young girls need protection even from their own poor judgment, especially from their own poor judgment. He looked directly at me as he said this, and something in his gaze made my stomach twist. It wasn't the look of a concerned brother. It was the look of someone asserting ownership. Daddy, tired from a long day at the shop, and trusting Marcus's judgment, implicitly nodded his agreement. Your brother's right, sweetheart. Better safe than sorry. There'll be plenty of time for socializing when you're older. That was how it began. Marcus inserting himself into decisions about my life, positioning himself as my guardian and protector. While my parents, busy with their own responsibilities and secure in their faith in their responsible eldest child, gradually handed over more and more authority to him. Within a few weeks, Marcus was deciding which clothes were appropriate for me to wear. That skirt's too short, Leah. You don't want people getting the wrong idea about what kind of girl you are, which friends I could spend time with. The Henderson girl is too boy crazy. She's a bad influence. And how I should spend my free time, instead of reading those silly mystery books, you should be learning more about keeping house. A woman's most important job is taking care of her family. Each restriction felt reasonable in isolation. After all, Marcus was older, more worldly, and genuinely seemed concerned about my welfare. Mama and Daddy trusted his judgment, so who was I to question it? But taken together, these new rules were slowly building a cage around me, and Marcus held all the keys. The first time Marcus hit me, I was so shocked, I actually wondered if I'd imagined it. It was a Friday evening in September 1967. Daddy and Mama had driven to Atlanta to pick up parts for the shop and wouldn't be back until morning. I was in my room, supposedly doing homework, but actually reading a Nancy Drew book I'd hidden inside my history textbook. Marcus appeared in my doorway without knocking, something that would have been unthinkable just months before. "Oh, what are you reading?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Just history," I said, trying to sound casual while discreetly closing the book. "Show me." It wasn't a request. Before I could think of a convincing lie, he was across the room grabbing the book from my hands. "The Secret of the Old Clock," he read aloud, his voice dripping with disapproval. "I should have known. Here I am trying to help you become a respectable young lady, and you're filling your head with this nonsense about girls running around having adventures and solving mysteries. It's just a story, Marcus. It's not hurting anyone. It's filling your head with unrealistic ideas about what women should be doing with their lives. Real women don't go chasing after criminals and mysteries. Real women focus on home, family, and serving the men in their lives." He was standing over me now, the book in his hands, and something in his posture reminded me of a teacher about to discipline a student. But we weren't in school, and he wasn't my teacher. He was my brother, and I was 15 years old, not 5. "You can't tell me what to read," I said, standing up to face him. "Mama said I could read whatever I wanted as long as it wasn't inappropriate." That's when his hand connected with my cheek. Not hard enough to seriously hurt me, but hard enough to shock me into silence. The slap seemed to echo in the quiet room, and for a moment neither of us moved. "I can tell you exactly what to read," he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "I can tell you what to wear, where to go, and how to behave. Do you know why Leah—" I touched my cheek, still too stunned to speak. "Because I'm the man in this family when Daddy's not here. Because you're a child who doesn't understand how dangerous the world is for girls who don't know their place. And because I love you too much to let you ruin your life with foolish ideas about independence and adventure." He ripped the book in half, the pages fluttering to the floor like wounded birds. "Clean this up, and if I find any more of these books in your room, you'll get more than a slap. Do you understand me?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Good. Now about what just happened, if you tell Mama and Daddy about this, I'll have to tell them how disrespectful and disobedient you've been. How you've been lying to them, hiding inappropriate books, talking back to your elders. Who do you think they'll believe? Their responsible eldest son who's trying to help his sister become a proper young lady, or a teenage girl who's obviously been influenced by too many wild stories about girls who think they don't need male guidance." The terrible thing was, I knew he was right. Marcus was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If it came down to his word against mine, there was no question who my parents would believe. After he left my room, I sat on the floor gathering the torn pages of my book, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my world. The brother who had once protected me from bullies had become a bully himself. The person I'd trusted most had revealed himself to be someone I needed protection from. But who could protect me from someone everyone else trusted completely? If that first slap had been an isolated incident, maybe I could have convinced myself it was just a moment of anger, a mistake that wouldn't be repeated. But instead, it was like a dam bursting. Once Marcus had crossed that line, once he'd established that he could hit me and get away with it, the violence became a regular tool in his arsenal of control. He was clever about it, always careful not to leave marks that would be visible to others. Pinches on my upper arms that would be hidden by sleeves. Hair pulled so hard it brought tears to my eyes but left no bruises. Painful twists of my wrists that would make me gasp but would heal within hours. And always the threats about what would happen if I told anyone. "They'll think you're hysteric," he would say after each punishment. "They'll think you're making up stories for attention. And then they'll be disappointed in both of us, me for failing to keep you in line, and you for being the kind of girl who lies about her own family." The psychological manipulation was perhaps even more damaging than the physical abuse. Marcus had an uncanny ability to make me question my own perceptions, to make me wonder if I was overreacting or being too sensitive. "I only discipline you because I care about you," he would say after each incident. "If I didn't love you, I'd let you run wild and ruin your reputation. But I can't stand by and watch my little sister destroy her chances for a good marriage and a respectable life." He framed every restriction, every punishment, every moment of cruelty as an act of love and protection. And because I was 15 years old and had been taught to respect my elders, particularly the men in my family, part of me actually believed him. The rules multiplied like weeds after a storm. I could no longer walk to school alone. Marcus would drive me and pick me up, making sure I had no opportunity for unsupervised conversations with friends. I couldn't answer the telephone when he was home. He needed to screen my calls to make sure I wasn't getting mixed up with the wrong crowd. I had to ask permission before getting a drink of water, before going to the bathroom, before moving from one room to another. At school, my friends began to notice changes in me. I'd always been a social, cheerful girl, but now I was withdrawn and anxious. I jumped when people spoke to me unexpectedly. I made excuses for why I couldn't join group activities or spend time at friends' houses. "Leah, honey, are you feeling all right?" my friend Jenny Morrison asked one day after I'd declined her invitation to spend Saturday afternoon at the swimming hole. "You seem different lately, sadder." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just been busy helping Mama around the house." But I wasn't fine. I was disappearing piece by piece under the weight of Marcus's control. The confident, curious girl I'd been was being systematically destroyed, replaced by a fearful shadow who lived in constant anticipation of the next punishment, the next humiliation, the next reminder of how powerless I truly was. I thought I understood the depths of Marcus's cruelty after months of his psychological and physical abuse. I thought I had seen the worst of what he was capable of. I was wrong. It was March 15, 1968, a date burned into my memory like a brand. Daddy and Mama had driven to Savannah for a family funeral and wouldn't be back until the following evening. Rose was visiting her sister in Macon. For the first time in months, Marcus and I were alone in the house overnight. I should have been afraid, should have found some excuse to stay elsewhere. But after months of abuse, I'd developed a kind of psychological numbness, a way of detaching myself from fear, because the alternative, living in constant terror, was unbearable. That evening, Marcus was different. He moved around the house with a restless energy I'd never seen before, like a caged animal pacing its enclosure. During dinner, he barely spoke, but I could feel him watching me with that same intense, calculating gaze I'd noticed months earlier in the kitchen. After I finished washing the dishes, he called me into the living room. "Sit down, Leah. We need to have a serious conversation." I perched on the edge of Mama's rocking chair, as far from the sofa where he sat as I could manage. "You're 16 now," he began, though my birthday had been 3 weeks earlier and he'd barely acknowledged it. "Old enough to understand certain responsibilities that come with being a woman." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I gripped the arms of the rocking chair, preparing to flee if necessary. "I don't know what you mean. Don't play innocent with me, Leah. You know exactly what I mean. You've been developing, becoming a young lady, and it's time you learned about your duties as a woman." He stood up and moved toward me, and every instinct I possessed screamed danger. "Marcus, I think I should go to bed now. I have a test tomorrow." "You'll go to bed when I say you can go to bed." His voice had taken on a tone I'd never heard before. Low, almost hypnotic, but with an undertone of menace that made my blood freeze. "Tonight, you're going to learn what it means to be a real woman. What it means to serve the men in your family the way women are supposed to serve." I bolted from the chair, but he was faster. His hand clamped down on my wrist with bruising force, and he pulled me against him with a strength I couldn't match. "Please, Marcus," I whispered, understanding now what he intended, but unable to believe it was really happening. Please, don't do this. I'm your sister. And that's exactly why this is perfect, he said, his breath hot against my ear. Who else is going to teach you? Some fumbling boy who doesn't care about you? Some stranger who might hurt you? I'm your brother. I love you. This is what love looks like, Leah. What happened next is something I've spent 54 years trying to forget and never quite succeeding. Marcus dragged me to my own bedroom, the room where I'd spent my childhood feeling safe and protected, and destroyed not just my innocence, but my fundamental understanding of what family meant, what love meant, what safety meant. When it was over, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling as though my soul had been ripped from my body. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing down his hair and adjusting his clothes as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Now you understand, he said conversationally. Now you know what it means to be a woman, to serve your family the way you're supposed to. And if you ever tell anyone about this, anyone at all, I'll make sure they know how you seduced me, how you tempted me, how you begged for it. Who do you think they'll believe, the respected eldest son or his little sister, who obviously threw herself at him like a common whore? He left my room whistling, and I curled into a ball on my bed, understanding finally and completely that I was utterly alone in the world. The brother who was supposed to protect me had become my destroyer. My parents, who were supposed to keep me safe, would never believe what had happened. The community that was supposed to support me would condemn me if they knew. I was 16 years old, and my life as I'd known it was over. The months that followed were a blur of psychological torture, punctuated by moments of physical violation that I've never been able to fully process even now, more than 5 decades later. Marcus had discovered a new tool of control, and he wielded it with the same calculated cruelty he'd shown in all his other forms of abuse. What made it even more horrific was how normal everything appeared to the outside world. Daddy continued to praise Marcus's responsibility and maturity. Mama continued to dote on her perfect eldest son. Rose continued to plan their summer wedding, glowing with happiness about her future with such a wonderful man. And Marcus continued to play his role flawlessly, the loving brother, who was perhaps a little overprotective, but only because he cared so much about his little sister's welfare. Leah's been having some teenage difficulties lately. I heard him tell Mama one morning after I'd been particularly withdrawn at breakfast. You know how girls get at this age, moody, unpredictable. I've been trying to provide some guidance, help her understand how to behave like a proper young lady. Bless your heart, Mama replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand. I don't know what we'd do without you, Marcus. Your father and I are so blessed to have a son who cares so much about his sister. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my mother by the shoulders and tell her exactly what kind of guidance her perfect son had been providing. But I knew it would be useless. Marcus had built such a perfect facade, had so thoroughly established himself as the responsible protector, that any accusation I made would only confirm his story about my being a troubled, attention-seeking teenager. At school, my grades began to slip. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't focus on homework, couldn't summon the energy to care about things that had once seemed important. My teachers noticed the change, but attributed it to typical teenage problems, or perhaps difficulties at home that were none of their business. This was 1968 in rural Georgia. People didn't talk openly about abuse, especially abuse within families. Teachers didn't probe too deeply into students' personal lives. Children were expected to obey their elders without question, and problems within families were considered private matters to be handled privately. I felt trapped in a glass box, surrounded by people who could see me, but couldn't hear my screams for help. If this story ended there, if I'd never found the courage to fight back, or the help to escape, I probably wouldn't be alive today to tell it. The despair was becoming overwhelming, and I'd begun to have dark thoughts about whether life was worth living, if this was all it would ever be. But in May 1968, something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Coleman, our elderly English teacher, retired suddenly due to health problems, and the school board had to scramble to find a replacement for the final month of the school year. The woman they hired was unlike anyone I'd ever met in Oakwood, Georgia. Miss Helena Santos was 26 years old, which seemed impossibly sophisticated to my 16-year-old eyes. She'd grown up in Atlanta, had attended college there, and had spent 2 years teaching in New York City before deciding to return to Georgia. She wore her dark hair in a sleek bob that never seemed to get mussed, dressed in tailored skirts and blouses that looked like they came from magazines, and spoke with an authority that commanded immediate respect from even the most troublesome students. But what struck me most about Miss Helena wasn't her sophistication or her obvious intelligence. It was the way she looked at people, really looked at them, as if she could see past the surface to whatever truth lay beneath. The first time she looked at me that way during my second day in her classroom, I felt exposed and terrified. Had she somehow guessed, could she tell just by looking at me what had been happening? For weeks I tried to avoid her penetrating gaze, to blend into the background of her classroom the way I'd learned to blend into the background everywhere else. But Miss Helena wasn't the kind of teacher who allowed students to disappear. "Miss Newman," she said one afternoon after class when the other students had filed out for the day, "could you stay for a moment? I'd like to discuss your essay." My heart pounded as I approached her desk. The essay she held was one I'd written about my hero, a painful piece about how my brother Marcus had always been my protector and guide. Even writing it had felt like swallowing poison, but I knew Marcus would read it. He checked all my schoolwork now, and I'd learned that the best way to survive was to give him what he wanted. "This is very well written," Miss Helena said, but her tone suggested that wasn't what she wanted to discuss. "Your grammar and structure are excellent, but I'm curious about something." She looked up at me with those penetrating dark eyes. "You write about your brother with great admiration, but when you were reading this aloud in class, you looked uncomfortable, almost frightened. Can you tell me why that might be?" The question hit me like a physical blow. No adult had ever asked me anything so direct, so personal, so dangerous. I don't know what you mean, Miss Helena. Marcus is wonderful. Everyone says so." "I'm sure everyone does say so, but I'm not asking what everyone says. I'm asking what you think, what you feel." She leaned forward slightly, her voice becoming gentler. "Leah, I've been teaching for several years now, and I've learned to recognize certain signs in my students. Signs that suggest a young person might be struggling with something difficult at home. If that's the case, if there's something you need to talk about, I want you to know that you can trust me." For a moment, standing there in that empty classroom, I felt a wild surge of hope. Here was an adult who was actually asking, actually paying attention, actually offering to listen. But then reality crashed back down on me. "There's nothing wrong at home," I said quickly. "My family is fine. Marcus is fine. Everything is fine." Miss Helena studied my face for a long moment, and I could see that she didn't believe me. But she didn't push, didn't demand answers I couldn't give. "All right," she said finally. "But Leah, if that ever changes, if you ever need someone to talk to about anything at all, my door is always open. Do you understand?" I nodded and fled from her classroom, but her words echoed in my mind for days afterward. My door is always open. When was the last time an adult had said anything like that to me? When was the last time anyone had offered to listen rather than lecture, to help rather than control? It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to take Miss Helena up on her offer. 3 weeks of Marcus's continued abuse, 3 weeks of feeling increasingly desperate and alone, 3 weeks of her kind eyes and open door, calling to me like a lighthouse in a storm. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon in late May, I approached her after class with trembling hands and a racing heart. "Miss Helena, you said if I ever needed to talk—" "Of course, sit down, Leah." She gestured to the chair beside her desk, and I sank into it gratefully. For a moment, we sat in silence, while I tried to find the words for something I'd never said aloud. It's about my brother, I finally whispered. I thought it might be. If I tell you something, do you promise not to tell anyone else unless I say it's okay? Miss Helena considered this carefully. Leah, if you're in immediate physical danger, I may have to involve other adults to keep you safe. But otherwise, yes. What you tell me stays between us, unless you decide otherwise. And then, haltingly painfully, I began to tell her the truth. Not all of it I couldn't bring myself to speak about the sexual abuse not yet but enough. The controlling behavior, the physical violence, the threats, the way Marcus had systematically isolated me from friends and activities. Miss Helena listened without interrupting, without expressing shock or disbelief, without asking me why I hadn't spoken up sooner or suggesting that I must be exaggerating. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Leah, she said finally, what you've described is not normal sibling behavior. It's not loving protection or guidance. It's abuse. And it's not your fault. Those last 4 words hit me like a revelation. It's not your fault. In all the months of Marcus's manipulation and control, he'd convinced me that everything he did was a response to my behavior, my failings, my need for correction and guidance. The idea that I might not be to blame for my own suffering was revolutionary. But Marcus says whatever he needs to say to maintain control over you. That's what abusers do, Leah. They convince their victims that the abuse is necessary, deserved, or normal. But I promise you it's none of those things. She leaned forward, her voice intense but kind. The question now is, what do you want to do about it? Over the next several days, Miss Helena and I met quietly after school to discuss options. She was careful not to pressure me into any particular course of action, but she also made it clear that doing nothing was not a sustainable choice. Abuse typically escalates over time, she explained during one of our conversations. What your brother is doing to you now is likely to get worse, not better. And Leah, I'm concerned that you haven't told me everything yet. She was right, of course. I still hadn't found the courage to tell her about the sexual abuse, partly because I was ashamed, and partly because I was afraid she'd be legally obligated to report it immediately, potentially putting me in even more danger, before we'd developed a plan to keep me safe. What I want, I said during one of our meetings, is for it to stop, for Marcus to leave me alone, for my parents to see who he really is. But I don't know how to make any of that happen. What if I told you there might be a way? Miss Helena had been thinking, she explained about my situation and possible solutions. She had a cousin, Detective John Santos, who worked for the Atlanta Police Department and specialized in cases involving domestic violence and abuse. He's helped other young women in situations similar to yours. The key is documentation evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away. If we can build a strong enough case, we can force the authorities to take action even against someone with your brother's reputation. The plan she outlined was both simple and terrifying. I would begin keeping a detailed written record of every incident of abuse, every threat, every controlling behavior. I would look for opportunities to gather physical evidence, photographs of bruises, recordings of threats, if possible, anything that could corroborate my testimony. It won't be easy, Miss Helena warned. You'll have to be very careful not to let Marcus know what you're doing, and you'll have to be prepared for the possibility that when this comes out, some people won't believe you or will blame you for destroying your family. What about my parents? What will happen to them? They'll be hurt and confused at first. But Leah, they love you. Once they understand the truth, they'll want to protect you. And they'll be grateful that you found the courage to speak up before something even worse happened. That evening, I began my secret documentation. I found an old composition notebook and hid it inside my mattress, and every night after the household was asleep, I would carefully record the day's events. May 28, 1968. Marcus forbade me from going to Jenny's birthday party. When I asked why, he twisted my wrist until I cried and said, "Because I said so, and that's all the reason you need." Later, he told Mama and Daddy that I didn't want to go because I was feeling antisocial lately. May 30, 1968. Marcus went through my school bag and found a note from Susan asking if I wanted to study together for our history final. He tore it up and said I was getting too friendly with people who don't understand our family's standards. He made me write Susan a note saying I couldn't study with her because I was too busy with household chores. June 7, 1968. Marcus forced me to accompany him to the store, even though I had a headache. When I walked too slowly for his liking, he grabbed my upper arm so hard I gasped. There are finger-shaped bruises there now, but they're hidden by my sleeve. Each entry was painful to write, but also strangely liberating. For months, I'd felt like I was going crazy, like maybe Marcus was right, and I was overreacting to normal brotherly behavior. Seeing it all written down in black and white made it impossible to doubt my own perceptions. Marcus and Rose's wedding was scheduled for July 20th, 1968, just 2 months away. As the date approached, I found myself caught between hope and terror. Hope that marriage might change, Marcus might give him someone else to focus his controlling impulses on, might finally free me from his obsessive attention. Terror that nothing would change, that I'd simply have to endure his abuse with Rose as an unwitting witness. The wedding preparations consumed the household. Mama threw herself into planning the reception. Daddy grumbled good-naturedly about the expense, and Marcus played the role of excited groom to perfection. He brought Rose flowers, took her on romantic picnics, and spoke eloquently about their future together whenever anyone would listen. Watching him with Rose was surreal. This was the same man who had been systematically destroying my life for months. Yet with his fiancée, he was gentle, attentive, and kind. It was like watching an actor play a role, and it made me wonder if the loving brother I'd known in childhood had been just as much of a performance. One evening in late June, Rose pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Leah, honey, I hope you know how much it means to Marcus to have you as his sister. He talks about you all the time, about how proud he is of you, how much he loves you. If she only knew what that love looked like when we were alone." "He's always been very protective," I managed to say. "That's exactly what I mean. He's always worrying about you, making sure you're safe and making good choices. It's so sweet how much he cares. I hope that when Marcus and I are married, you'll think of me as a real sister, not just an in-law." Rose was genuinely kind, genuinely caring, and the thought of what Marcus might do to her once they were married made me sick with worry. But what could I tell her? That her perfect fiancé was actually a monster who had been abusing his own sister? Even if she believed me, it would destroy her just days before her wedding. "I'm sure we'll be great friends," I said and tried to mean it. As the wedding approached, Marcus's behavior toward me became increasingly erratic. Some days he was almost manic with excitement about his upcoming marriage, talking constantly about his and Rose's plans, and barely seeming to notice I existed. Other days he was moody and possessive, as if the thought of having a wife was making him cling more tightly to his control over me. "After I'm married," he told me one evening as we sat on the front porch, ostensibly enjoying the summer evening, but actually enduring another of his lectures, "I'll still be responsible for you. Rose understands that family comes first, that I have obligations to my sister that marriage can't change. Maybe when you're married, you'll be too busy with your own life to worry about mine." It was a mild statement, barely even a challenge, but Marcus's face darkened immediately. "Is that what you think, that marriage is going to make me forget about my duties as your big brother? That I'm going to abandon you to make whatever foolish mistakes you want?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I'd learned to fear. "Let me make something very clear, little sister. You are my responsibility until the day you marry a man I approve of, and maybe not even then. Rose marrying me doesn't change that. If anything, it means I'll have even more reason to make sure you don't do anything to embarrass our family name." That night, I wrote in my hidden journal, Marcus made it clear that marriage won't change anything. He still considers me his property. I think he might actually be more dangerous now, not less. Miss Helena is right. This has to end before it gets worse. The breaking point came 3 days before Marcus's wedding, On a stifling hot July evening, when the air was so thick with humidity, it felt like breathing through cotton. Mama and Daddy had gone to the church for wedding rehearsal, and Rose was at her own family's house for a pre-wedding dinner with her relatives from out of town. I was in my room theoretically addressing wedding invitations, but actually writing in my secret journal when Marcus appeared in my doorway. He'd been drinking not heavily, but enough that I could smell whiskey on his breath and see a slight unsteadiness in his movements. "What are you writing?" My blood froze. I quickly closed the composition book and slipped it under some wedding-related papers. "Just addressing these last few invitations for Mama." "Let me see." He moved into the room, and I could see something different in his demeanor, a reckless energy that set every nerve in my body on high alert. "There's nothing to see, Marcus, just invitations." I said, "Let me see." Before I could stop him, he'd grabbed the papers from my desk, including the journal I'd tried to hide. The composition book fell to the floor, landing open to a page of my careful documentation. Marcus bent down and picked it up, his eyes scanning the page. I watched his expression change from curiosity to rage, and I knew my secret was out. "What the hell is this?" He read aloud, July 10th. Marcus slapped me because I was 5 minutes late getting home from the library. He said if I was ever late again, he'd make sure I never went anywhere alone. July 12th. Marcus went through my dresser drawers looking for evidence of bad behavior. He didn't find anything, but he told me he'd be watching me more closely from now on. He looked up at me, his face a mask of fury. "You've been writing down lies about me, making up stories, planning to use them against me somehow." "They're not lies, Marcus. Everything in there is exactly what happened." "Shut up!" He slammed the journal shut and stepped toward me. "Who put you up to this? Was it that new teacher, that Helena woman, who's been filling your head with ideas about independence and women's rights?" I didn't answer, but my expression must have given me away. "I knew it. I knew there was something wrong with her the first time I saw her at the school. Probably some man-hating feminist who thinks she can turn innocent girls against their own families." He began flipping through the journal, reading more entries, his rage building with each page. "This is poison, Leah. Twisted lies meant to destroy everything our family stands for. Do you have any idea what would happen if anyone saw this? What it would do to Mama and Daddy? What it would do to Rose? Maybe they should know the truth about who you really are." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, and I knew immediately that I'd made a terrible mistake. Marcus's face went completely white, then flushed dark red with rage. "Mem, the truth you want to talk about, truth. So, lie." He grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet with such force that I cried out. "The truth is that you're a sick, twisted girl who's been harboring unnatural feelings for her own brother and making up fantasies to justify them. The truth is that you've been trying to seduce me for months, and when I rejected your advances, you decided to destroy my reputation out of spite." "That's not true, and you know it. Is it then explain this?" He pulled me toward my dresser and yanked open the bottom drawer, the one where I kept my most private possessions. Hidden beneath some old sweaters was a small wooden box, and in that box were things I'd forgotten about, things that Marcus had apparently planted there. A photograph of Marcus that I'd never seen before. A letter in handwriting that looked like mine, but that I'd never written professing romantic love for my own brother. A pressed flower that was supposed to represent some romantic moment we'd never shared. "Evidence of your obsession with me." Marcus said, his voice now calm and controlled, in a way that was somehow more terrifying than his rage had been. "Evidence that any reasonable person would interpret as proof that you've been the one pursuing an inappropriate relationship." I stared at the planted evidence in horror, understanding that Marcus had been planning for this possibility for months. He'd been preparing to destroy my credibility, to paint me as a disturbed girl with unhealthy fixations, should I ever try to expose him. "You planted those things. I never wrote that letter. I never—" "Try proving that to anyone who matters. Try explaining why your own brother would lie about something so terrible." He moved closer, backing me against the wall. Here's what's going to happen, Leah. You're going to burn that journal. You're going to forget about whatever poisonous ideas that teacher put in your head. You're going to behave yourself at my wedding like the loving, supportive sister everyone expects you to be. And you're going to keep your mouth shut about our private family business for the rest of your life. And if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of girl you really are. I'll show them this evidence of your obsession with me. I'll tell them how you've been throwing yourself at me trying to break up my engagement, making up lies to get attention. By the time I'm finished, you'll be the one everyone sees as the monster, not me. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. And then, when your reputation is completely destroyed, and no decent man in this county would consider marrying you, you'll be completely dependent on me for the rest of your life. My crazy spinster sister who lives in my house and serves my family because she has nowhere else to go, and no one else who will take her. The picture he painted was so vivid, so plausible, that for a moment I could see it all playing out exactly as he described. Marcus was charming, respected, trusted by everyone who mattered. If it came down to his word against mine, there was no question who would be believed. But as I stood there against the wall feeling trapped and desperate, something Miss Helena had said came back to me. Abuse typically escalates over time. What your brother is doing to you now is likely to get worse, not better. Looking into Marcus's eyes, I could see that she was right. This wouldn't end with his wedding. Marriage wouldn't satisfy his need to control me. It would only give him more power, more respectability, more tools to use against me. If I gave in now, if I let him destroy my journal and my evidence, I would be condemning myself to a lifetime of escalating abuse with no way out. No, I said quietly. What did you say? I said no. I won't burn the journal. I won't keep quiet. And I won't let you destroy any more lives. For a moment, Marcus looked genuinely shocked, as if he couldn't believe I was defying him. Then, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. A cold, calculating rage that made me understand I was in more immediate physical danger than I'd ever been. Then you've made your choice, he said softly. And you'll have to live with the consequences. What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a nightmare. Marcus grabbed my journal and the planted evidence, and I knew that if he got them out of my room, I'd lose any chance of proving my story. Give those back. I lunged for the journal, but Marcus was stronger and faster. He shoved me backward, and I stumbled over my desk chair, falling hard to the floor. You want to fight me, little sister? You think you're strong enough to take on a grown man? There was something different in his voice now, not just anger, but excitement. As if the prospect of physical violence was actually thrilling to him. Stay away from me, Marcus. I scrambled to my feet, putting the bed between us. Or what you'll scream. Go ahead. Mama and Daddy are at the church. The neighbors are inside with their windows closed because of the heat. No one's going to hear you. He was right, and we both knew it. Our house sat on a large lot with plenty of space between us and our neighbors, and the thick July air would muffle any sounds I might make. You know what I think. Marcus continued, moving slowly around the bed toward me. I think it's time you learned a lesson you should have learned months ago. A lesson about what happens to little girls who don't know their place. I backed toward my bedroom door, but Marcus anticipated the move and cut me off. Not that way. We're going downstairs. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run cold, a switchblade knife, the kind he used for various tasks around the auto shop. Marcus, put that away. You're scaring me. Good. It's about time you were properly scared of me. Now move. He gestured toward the door with the knife, and I had no choice but to obey. We walked slowly down the stairs, Marcus close behind me, the blade glinting in the light from the hallway fixture. Where are we going? Basement. It's nice and private down there and the walls are thick. We can have a real heart-to-heart conversation without worrying about being interrupted. The basement of our house was unfinished, with concrete walls and floors and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Daddy used it mainly for storage, and it had always felt cold and unwelcoming, even in summer. Marcus flicked on the light and gestured for me to go down the wooden steps ahead of him. "Please don't do this," I whispered. "Do what we're just going to talk. Just going to come to an understanding about how things are going to be from now on." But something in his voice told me he had more than talking in mind. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement felt like a tomb, cool, damp, and completely cut off from the outside world. Marcus positioned himself between me and the stairs, making it clear that I wasn't leaving until he decided I could. "Now then," he said, folding the knife closed, but keeping it visible in his hand. "Let's discuss your future, shall we?" Standing in that basement trapped between concrete walls, with my abusive brother blocking my only exit, I experienced a moment of perfect clarity. This was it, the moment Miss Helena had warned me about, when Marcus's abuse would escalate to something truly dangerous. If I didn't find a way to escape, if I didn't find the courage to fight back, I might not survive the night. "Here's how this is going to work," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm in the dim basement light. "You're going to hand over any copies of that journal you might have made. You're going to promise never to speak to that teacher or anyone else about our family's private business. And you're going to spend the rest of your life being grateful that I'm generous enough to keep your terrible secrets." Well, what terrible secrets? The secret that you've been abusing me. The secret that you raped your own sister. The words hung in the air between us like an explosive charge. It was the first time I'd spoken the truth so directly, and seeing Marcus's face change, seeing the mask of reasonable authority slip away to reveal the monster underneath, was both terrifying and liberating. "Rape." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call it when a man teaches his sister about her responsibilities as a woman? When he prepares her for marriage by showing her how to please her future husband? You're sick, Marcus. What you did to me was rape, and deep down you know it. What I did to you was an act of love, an act of education. But if you want to call it rape," he shrugged, opening the switchblade again, "then I guess we'll have to make sure you never get the chance to use such ugly words about your loving brother." The threat was unmistakable, and I understood that I was fighting for my life now, not just my freedom. They'll know it was you," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "When they find my body, they'll know you killed me. Will they?" Poor, disturbed Leah, who's been harboring unhealthy obsessions with her own brother. Who wrote love letters and kept photographs and finally couldn't handle the shame of her unnatural desires. A tragic suicide, really. Everyone will feel so sorry for our family. As he spoke, Marcus moved closer, the knife held loosely in his hand, but ready to strike. I backed away until I felt the cold concrete wall against my spine. "The only question," he continued, "is whether you want this to be quick and relatively painless, or whether you want to make it difficult for both of us." That's when I noticed something Marcus had overlooked in his confidence. Behind him, near the workbench where Daddy kept his tools, was a heavy wrench that had been left out from some recent project. If I could get to it, if I could catch Marcus off guard. "You're right," I said, trying to sound defeated. "I can't fight you. You're too strong, too smart. You've thought of everything." Marcus smiled, the expression made hideous by the context. "That's my sensible little sister. I knew you'd see reason eventually." He relaxed slightly, and I took my chance. Instead of cowering against the wall, I suddenly darted to my left toward the workbench. Marcus, caught off guard by my unexpected movement, was a half-second too slow to intercept me. My hand closed around the wrench just as his grabbed my shoulder. "You little—" I spun around and swung the wrench with all the strength desperation could give me. It connected with Marcus's forearm, the one holding the knife, and he cried out in pain and surprise. The switchblade went flying, clattering across the concrete floor and sliding under a pile of old lumber. For a moment, we stared at each other in mutual shock. Then Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You're going to pay for that." He lunged for me, but I was ready this time. I brought the wrench up again, catching him in the ribs hard enough to double him over. "Help!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, even though I knew he was right about no one being able to hear me. "Somebody help me!" Marcus straightened up, his breathing labored, but his eyes still full of murderous intent. "Scream all you want. No one's coming to save you." But something had changed in the balance of power between us. I was no longer the helpless victim, and he was no longer the one in complete control. I had a weapon, I had momentum, and most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. "Maybe not," I said, raising the wrench again. "But I'm not going down without a fight. And if you kill me, Marcus, you'll have to explain the bruises on your body. You'll have to explain why we were in the basement together. You'll have to convince everyone that your suicide story makes sense when there's obvious evidence of a struggle." For the first time since this confrontation began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. People will ask questions. Rose will ask questions. And maybe someone will remember that new teacher who took such an interest in me. Someone will wonder if there might be more to the story than what you're telling them. We circled each other warily in the dim basement, like two animals looking for an opening. But I could see that my words were having an effect. Marcus was realizing that killing me wouldn't be as easy or as clean as he'd imagined. Besides, I continued trying to keep him talking while I looked for a way to get past him to the stairs. "Miss Helena knows about you. I've told her everything, well, almost everything. If something happens to me, she'll make sure the police investigate properly." It was a bluff, but Marcus didn't know that. Miss Helena knew about the psychological and physical abuse, but I still hadn't told her about the sexual violence. Still, the possibility that I might have confided in an adult was clearly troubling to him. "What exactly did you tell her?" he demanded. "Enough! And if I don't show up to our meeting tomorrow afternoon, she'll know something happened to me." Another bluff, but a convincing one. Marcus was beginning to realize that his perfect plan had too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong. "Fine," he said finally. "We'll do this the hard way." He charged at me, counting on his superior size and strength to overwhelm me despite my weapon. But desperation made me faster than he expected. I sidestepped his charge and brought the wrench down on his back as he stumbled past me. Marcus went down hard, his head striking the edge of the workbench as he fell. For a terrifying moment, he lay completely still, and I wondered if I'd killed him. Then he groaned and tried to push himself up, blood trickling from a cut on his scalp. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover enough to continue the fight. Still clutching the wrench, I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time in my desperation to get out of that basement tomb. Behind me, I could hear Marcus cursing and struggling to his feet, but I had a head start now, and I intended to use it. I burst out of the basement and ran straight to the telephone in our kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial Miss Helena's number. She'd given it to me weeks earlier, telling me to call if I ever needed help, but I'd never imagined I'd be using it under circumstances like these. "Hello. Miss Helena, it's Leah. I need help. Marcus he had a knife. I'm alone in the house, and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a panicked rush, but Miss Helena understood immediately. "Are you hurt? Are you safe right now?" "I think so. I got away from him, but he's still in the house, in the basement. I think I hurt him, but I don't know how badly." "Listen to me very carefully, Leah. I want you to leave the house right now. Come to my apartment. Do you remember the address I gave you?" "Yes, but..." "No buts. Leave immediately. Don't wait. Don't pack anything. Don't try to check on Marcus. Just get out of there and come here. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. I'm going to call my cousin John right now. He'll drive down from Atlanta tonight if necessary. Everything's going to be all right, Leah, but you need to get to safety first." I hung up the phone and grabbed my purse, which thankfully contained my secret journal. I'd been carrying it with me ever since Marcus had discovered it, knowing it might be my only proof if something like this happened. As I headed for the front door, I could hear sounds from the basement, Marcus moving around, probably looking for his knife and trying to figure out his next move. I didn't wait to find out what that might be. Miss Helena's apartment was only 6 blocks away, but it felt like the longest walk of my life. Every car that passed made me think Marcus might be following me. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding a threat. By the time I reached her building, I was shaking all over and fighting back tears of relief and exhaustion. Miss Helena met me at the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "You're safe now," she said firmly. "You're safe, and you're incredibly brave, and we're going to make sure Marcus never hurts you again."